This video is gonna be very weird. In the next 15 minutes or so, I might be able to convince you that nothing in the world exists and we are all living a very slow, painful death. Alright, enough of that shite, because what I described right there is the whole idea of nihilism, a 21st century hipster philosophy that has gotten very popular these days because of the show Rick and Morty. As you all know, people love to jump on bandwagon these days, and Rick and Morty has become a must-see cult TV show that people celebrate and adore like it's their firstborn. I for one had been a sucker for Rick and Morty, not for their whole portrayal of nihilism, but I love their satire and the humor that they use that we usually don't really see on TV shows these days. But I also love Rick and Morty for their ability to break the invisible fourth wall that usually involves going over the boundaries and pissing off a bunch of liberalist, fundamentalist, feminist, clowning Donald Trump on Twitter and calling yourself an intellectual. I made it up. Anyways, let's focus on the video. On this episode of Rick and Morty called Meeseeks and Destroy, the director took a very different approach with their character design and left the audience wondering what the actual message was. You can literally create thousands of interpretations of this episode, and the chances are you are probably correct in any of these explanations, because the show in general is very open-minded to different ideologies, morals and messages. If I said these blue creatures represented every poor teenager in the UK who was forced to work in McDonald's, and every second that passed by their existence became more and more insufferable, like Mr. Meeseeks, I actually did that and I quit after 3 days because the pay was terrible and the work environment, oh boy, let me not dig into that rabbit hole. Anyways, you get the sense, right? You can inference a lot of messages and metaphors that can be applied to real life in this episode. So let's explore these creatures, shall we? So these rip-off Squidward-like creatures was created by Rick, the smartest man alive, to serve a singular purpose in which they will go to any length to fulfill it. After they serve their purpose, they expire and vanish into the air. Their motivation to help others comes from the fact that their existence is painful to a Meeseeks, and the only way to be removed from existence is to complete the tasks they were called to perform.
This is a Meeseeks box. Let me show you how it works. You press this.
I'm Mr. Meeseeks! Look at me!
You make a request. Mr. Meeseeks, open Jerry's stupid mayonnaise jar.
Yes, sirree!
The Meeseeks fulfills the request.
All done!
Wow! And then it stops existing.
These tasks can be anything ranging from
To keep it simple.
I'm Mr. Meeseeks!
I want to be popular at school.
Ooh, okay!
Summer, what did I just...
Ooh, I'm Mr. Meeseeks! Look at me!
I want to be a more complete woman.
Beth?
Oh, yeah! Yes, ma'am!
You guys are doing it wrong. He said simple.
Hey there, I'm Mr. Meeseeks!
Mr. Meeseeks, I would like to take 2 strokes off my golf game.
The longer the Meeseeks stay alive, the more sanity they begin to lose. Rick wants the Smith family to keep their tasks simple and easy. The unusual lifespan will cause Mr. Meeseeks' attitude and mental state to worsen dramatically. The relatively long and tortuous existence quickly drive these creatures to violent behavior and outright insanity. The psychological and physical torment leads to many stress-like symptoms to these Meeseeks. For example, discoloration of the skin, hair growth, sweat patches. Doesn't that sound very familiar to another form of species, humans? We'll see about that later. So what makes these creatures very interesting, and what kind of ideologies do they give out to the audience? Let's find out. Wouldn't be a Rick and Morty episode if they didn't poke fun or reference the idea of nihilism in some sort of way. In my opinion, the main purpose of this episode was to show how humanity became warm to the idea of nihilism and how over time we adapted to the principles of it. To summarize this, Mr. Meeseeks is a metaphor to human life. As humans, we are born unconscious of our reality. Just like Mr. Meeseeks, when they are first summoned, they are susceptible to everything and anything. They will say yes and have a positive outlook of life. Mr. Meeseeks, at an early age of their existence, seem very cheerful and friendly. They only live a simple life, which is to help others and fulfill their goal. Doesn't this sound familiar to us human beings? When we were at our developmental stage, let's say age 6, we literally had one goal in mind, and that was to be happy. We didn't care about the dangers of life because we didn't have the mental capacity to understand dynamics around us. But as we grew older and faced the realities of life, which included failure, death, mental illness, not achieving our goals and dreams, we became more worried about our existence. Just like Mr. Meeseeks, some of us teenagers and young adults can relate to the idea of how did you feel when you first faced your adversity in life? What age were you at? Did you want to quit like Mr. Meeseeks when reality eventually hit them? When they realized that Jerry, the main character, wasn't gonna become better at golf and insisted on giving up. As a result, they weren't going to achieve their purpose and vanish into the air. Just like these creatures, the moment we became conscious and realized that life isn't as smooth as we first thought, and dreams were nothing but a manipulative tool used by capitalism to make us work harder at our labor, that's what some people say, we developed stress, worry, anger, just like Meeseeks, and we had lost our sight of our moral standards. For example, crimes, suicide rates started rising, mental health became a huge point of disparity, and because of this, people dipped into the ideology of nihilism. The people who could not suffer through the actualities of the world had lost their cause and meaning of life. They became nihilists. They couldn't fit in with society and things the modern world offered us, like the tradition of a family, religion, material possession. They meant nothing in the end because we are all gonna die, like Mr. Meeseeks. So why bother to work hard? In some ways, they gained free will, and at other times, they became the forgotten generation, the lost cause. You decide on that one for yourself. This episode of Rick and Morty also touches heavily on efflorescent nihilism. Wow, I can't say that. In his book Law and Humanities, Gilbert Leong acknowledges that laughter and satire may be the solution to everything. Look at this quote from one of the father figures of nihilism. When nothing else from today has a future, our laughter is one thing that does. That's kinda true. This whole idea fits in well with the character design of Mr. Meeseeks, who are supposed to be human representation of nihilism, because when they face adversity, they laugh. When they complete their purpose, they laugh. When they are first summoned, they are cheerful and happy. Something we humans can learn from. If we are truly dynamic creatures who thrive to live in the present, we must learn to laugh at all stages of life. If we are truly looking for contentment in life, then laughter is probably the solution. The next theory probably makes the most sense considering the foreshadowing and reference made earlier by Rick.
Now, just keep your requests simple. They're not gods.
And also shout out to eSaber from Steemit for this article and suggestion. After looking at some detail, it is kinda logical to say that the director may have wanted to portray the idea of God in the character of Meeseeks. Look, I am in no shape or form trying to offend religion here because I'm a religious person myself. Hear me out. Meeseeks does so many things God in theory is supposed to do. First, he answers your prayers. You can wish anything as long as it's basic from Mr. Meeseeks, and they will do anything in their way to achieve it. It's similar to praying. When we pray, we hope that God is listening to us and wanting him to answer our prayers. Shaping God in a Meeseeks fashion makes fun of religion and how extreme the idea of God is. This is kind of smart from Rick and Morty. Also, this episode is trying to send a message that God isn't some type of friend, a yes man to us. He isn't a maid that that's supposed to do everything you command of him. Of course, as with any Rick and Morty fashion, they went over the board with the outcome and the ideology of these creatures and made this episode a memorable one. Secondly, he's a punisher as well as a lover. We see this when Meeseeks turns on Jerry and threatens to murder a poor passenger in the restaurant if he didn't try to achieve his goal at becoming better at golf. When we ask too much of God, he will go out of his way to punish you and people around you. It's so clear that Rick and Morty is pointing fun at religion here and how absurd the idea that humans created this superior being that is God to fill up our needs and wants. I don't agree with this, but God only exists if we desire it to. We only think about God when we want our prayers answered, when we want something out of him, but eventually he disappears and vanishes, just like Mr. Meeseeks when we get our request accomplished. In some sense, we use God when we are desperate and for our selfish deeds. This idea of using God is clearly funny to the directors at Rick and Morty. Overall, I think it's kind of refreshing how much these TV shows dip into different philosophies like nihilism. Even though I heavily disagree with this idea, because if you think about it, it really isn't an ideology. An ideology is a system of ideals and ideas, especially one which forms the basis of economic and political theory and policy. I haven't really seen any principles of nihilism where there has been emphasis on economical plans on running a society. Nihilism is more of a perspective of life. People who want free will in their life probably nudge into the idea of nihilism where you are free from realities of the world. The thing is, nihilism is a very hypocritical ideology or perspective because every human being who say they are free should have a different perspective of life than you. Nihilism forces you to go on a path, a direction that's created by somebody else's perception. Anyways, I'm jabbering on at this point. Shout out to Rick and Morty, shout out to philosophies of this world, shout out to this shit video, and shout out to you. Like and subscribe, I guess, and thank you for the support recently. Don't forget to live in the present. Adios, peace.